What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some things for Baldur's Gate 3 that I think need to improve before the actual launch of the game, and seeing as we're in early access, there is no better time to talk about it. Now, before we jump into the video, I do want to mention I'm going to have some footage in the background that might have some, I guess, contextual spoilers for you. What I mean by that is, well, I'm not going to spoil anything in particular, and I'm just going to show you footage of like combat and stuff. You might see that and then realize that there's like certain enemies in certain areas, that kind of thing. And because the game is so new, I just wanted to point that out like first thing. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm not going to spoil directly anything besides maybe some companion stuff a little later, but that's going to be about it. So when I get to the companions, you might want to skip that part, but I'm going to try to save that for at least towards the end anyway. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it. So some of the stuff I think that needs to improve basically starts right at character creation. Character creation is not new player friendly, like at all, almost. Dungeons & Dragons character creation, or just making a character for the tabletop game, requires you to read a chapter, and even then, you might get the gist, but you might not understand it all the time, and you're probably going to have to make some references back to it at some point. If you're a new player to like anything Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set, you're going to come into this and you're not going to know a lot about what's going on. And factually, video games are ultimately more popular than a tabletop game. That's just the way it goes. So there are going to be people who pick up this game and have never played Dungeons & Dragons. There just are. And because of that, I think character creation is going to be an unnecessarily hard time with confusing bits for people who haven't played Dungeons & Dragons before. And I think there are two things that need to be done to fix that. One is like a definite, they're going to have to do that. And then two, I say, is more of a maybe, but it's kind of just, I'll get into it in a second. First thing, they need to fix some of these tooltips as you mouse over information. Like, they do offer some tooltips and stuff about some of the more confusing parts, but some of the tooltips are at best vague and at worst kind of misleading. So when it talks about your proficiency bonuses on the in-game rolls that it does, when it actually rolls the die 20 on a skill check or something like that, the problem is that the way it shows up on screen versus what's actually happening behind the scenes doesn't exactly line up, and the tooltip is a little misleading. So things like that need to be polished up, and I imagine they'll probably do that, especially as they get feedback from early access. Like, I'm pretty sure that's guaranteed to happen. They'll fix a lot of that kind of dialogue-y stuff in the tooltips, that kind of thing. Maybe make those more explanatory, that kind of stuff. The second thing I would actually like to see them do, but I honestly don't know if they will. This is an officially licensed Wizard of the Coast game, so it's licensed Dungeons & Dragons, 100%. So in a previous video, I mentioned that it doesn't feel great to tell someone to have to go read the character creation chapter of the 5th edition player's handbook before you make a character in this game. So I was thinking to myself, with this being a literally officially licensed game, in addition to brushing things up in the interface to make character creation more appealing and coherent, why can't they also just like put in some pretty PDF in the game at character creation that literally walks you through what you're doing and gives the detailed, like, literal rules explanation of some of these things, maybe tweaked a little bit in context of the actual video game, because there are like little tweaks here and there, that kind of stuff. Not necessarily that they might need it, because again, ideally they'll brush up some of these tooltips and stuff and just make it make more sense. But then as a backup, there's like literally the guide on the character creation screen that you can click and open. I think that would be really helpful to a lot of people. And I'm curious what you guys think about that. If you feel like you want to comment down below about it, I'm very curious how people think they should approach that problem, because it is going to be a problem. The second thing I want to talk about is combat percent chance to hit. So, combat in general feels very Dungeons & Dragons. I don't have a lot of complaints with it personally. I'm sure more than people than just me will have things to say about it. Personally, I think it's pretty good. There are two specific things about the combat, though, that bother me. So when you guys roll initiative, if several of your characters go one after the other, you can click through them and take their turns in any order, which is nice. I like it. Problem is that if you end turn on one of those intertwined characters that are right next to each other in the initiative order, sometimes it literally just cancels the other two people's turns, say if you had 3, it'll cancel 2 of their turns if you haven't taken their turns. It doesn't do it all the time. It's very inconsistent, so I don't know if it's a bug or what. But I think for starters, they need to add like a check or something that all 3 of those characters have like taken an action. Maybe give like a warning real quick or something before you like click off and lose turns because you didn't realize that was going to happen. And the second thing is the combat percent chance to hit that I just mentioned earlier. So when you mouse over something with an attack or an ability, it gives you the percent chance to hit as you might expect. The problem is that it doesn't give you a lot of detailed information as to why that percent chance to hit is what it is. The problem with this, and I already know why it does that, is because a lot of the reasons why is simply because it's not telling you why. For instance, if you're using an archer, you have advantage if you are above and like you have the high ground on enemies you are trying to attack. I know that. The game can tell you that if you look it up, actually. Like if you go to the tutorials and stuff, it will tell you that. Problem is when you're mousing over the target you want to hit, on the left part of the screen, it does a little breakdown of the percent chance to hit. And it gives you somehow almost no information at all. Like I've seen maybe 1 or 2 things, but it never tells you everything about why it is what it is. It doesn't tell me like enemy's armor class. It doesn't tell me, do I have advantage? Sometimes it'll say threatened or advantaged. But it's just real vague. Like when I mouse over something for percent chance to hit, as detailed as the rule set for this game is, I think if they're going to show that little pop-up on the left, they need to show you every single thing contributing to your percent chance to hit. For me personally, at least, that would go a long way towards making combat a lot more fun, because then I would actually understand, like maybe my positioning's just slightly off or something. I would be able to tell exactly why I only have a 50% chance to hit as opposed to like 91, you know what I mean? So that brings us to another thing that I don't like. This one's actually super minor in comparison to those other things, and that is that the in-game map is just the worst. Like, it's such a silly thing to complain about, especially in early access. I sincerely hope they fix it though. If you pull up the map, it doesn't, if you scroll all the way out, show the entire area. Like you can tell it's supposed to because it's just missing like bits around the edge of the map. But the problem is then you can't even like scroll it around to see what you're missing. To make it worse, when you are in a building or like a dungeon or something like that and you bring up the map, it's like super zoomed in and you still can't like scroll it around a little to make sure you actually see what you're trying to look at. So the map is just like super clunky and hard to use, which is like a weird problem, and I hope it's easy for them to fix, and I hope they do fix it, because I don't like using the map at all. It's not like impossible to use, like it's not unusable. It's just like just slightly annoying, except you have to look at the map a lot, at least if you're me, and it annoys the crap out of me because it keeps popping up every time I need to look at the map, which is a lot. So there's that. And that brings me to a kind of a weird thing. It's hard for me to verbalize, actually, what the problem is. Sometimes when you're doing side quests and stuff and you're having conversations with relevant NPCs, sometimes it's like it skips around dialogue almost, or like the context of the dialogue is just like a little off. My favorite example of this is, by the way, tiny spoiler, if you have Lae'zel, which is the Githyanki companion, you're supposed to find part of Githyanki patrol nearby to help you try to remove the Mind Flayer. And when you run into this patrol, there's a whole dialogue with like their leader and Lae'zel. Again, spoiler, skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear it for this part. It's like a minor spoiler for Lae'zel's story. For whatever reason, the leader of this patrol lies to Lae'zel, telling her to do something that isn't like Githyanki protocol or whatever. But the whole conversation, it's just like skipping around, the camera's weird, this patrol leader guy keeps barking orders that make no sense when you walked up to the guy. Now when you get done with that conversation, Lae'zel will explain later that the dude was lying. For whatever reason, he's going against their leader's wishes, and he's blatantly lying to Lae'zel, telling her to do things that aren't important, I guess would be the right word. Now, in context, if you were playing as Lae'zel, and, if origin characters were available, that would make more sense. The dialogue options could be tailored for that to make sense. But for you to just randomly walk up on a conversation, even if Lae'zel is with you, and you just get like a couple of skill checks for play along or like what are you talking about type stuff, it's ever so slightly wrong. And I think they need to flesh conversations like that out a little more to where, not necessarily to spoil the fact that Lae'zel's supposed to tell you he's lying, that part's fine, but like at least make the context of the conversation make a little sense, because I was confused throughout this entire conversation. I didn't know what he was talking about. Lae'zel doesn't even try to mention finding the creche or whatever it is that the Githyanki little hideout area is, so that they can get the tadpoles removed from their heads. Like, that's the whole reason you go to find this patrol, and it never comes up in this conversation. It just doesn't make any sense, and there's a ton of examples of this all throughout the side quests. The main story is pretty good about it. It's actually not nearly as prevalent in the main story, and I think that's, obviously just because the main story probably got more attention. I just want to say I hope they brush a lot of that stuff up. Last but not least, I'm going to talk about some of the companions. So this, again, I'm not going to have like a ton of spoilers, but there are going to be some if you want to like save the companion stories or whatever for yourself. So a little bit of spoiler here and there, but for the most part, I'm just going to talk freely about them. So if you don't want to hear that, maybe go ahead and click off the video. Thanks for watching, that kind of thing. My complaint about the companions, broad strokes, is that like none of them are really that interesting. Astarion, the vampire spawn, could be interesting, and he fails to be. So he's been a vampire spawn for hundreds of years, and his entire personality is, I'm dreadfully bored, let's do something fun, and for me. Like, it's just, like, how are you going to be a vampire spawn on the run from your delirious master who's probably going to try to kill you, which is kind of his backstory as it starts to tell you about it. You're infected with this tadpole. There's all this craziness going on. You can suddenly walk in the sun, and your biggest complaint is that we didn't kill other people who were innocent because, it would have been a laugh. Like, what? That's just not relatable at all to me. I had a hard time connecting with that one. Lae'zel, the Githyanki warrior, hers, I like that they stuck so strongly to what they were going for with her. Like, she's meant to be this badass warrior who is like, nothing else matters but getting this mind flayer abomination out of our heads. Very well done as far as the roleplay. Like, they really nailed it with what a Githyanki warrior would be towards mind flayers, because they hate each other. So the problem I had is that we're going through this. Lae'zel is constantly like the worst, right? Because, I'm doing other side questy stuff, and she's like, hey pal, tadpole in her head, let's worry about that. Makes sense. I had no problem with the context. Like, in terms of a roleplay, like that, of course that's what she would be doing. But then we get towards the end of the thing, and there's a celebration at the camp. I won't give any spoilers for that. But then you talk to Lae'zel, and suddenly she goes like, it was so impressive to see you fight. If only you would have sided me more. And then she gives like this unnecessarily tantalizing speech about you guys banging. It's like, what was that? Like, just out of nowhere. So the writing for her just got like really weird all of a sudden. And she's like, who are you telling? Who is this for? Like, if we're not getting along, we're not telling you. And then suddenly you're like, we could have banged, but you were rude. Like, what is that? It just seems super out of place to me, I guess. And then Gale, the wizard, his story is actually not too bad. Like, he jumps out at you. He has like an interesting mystery. There's a lot of stuff that pops up with him, and they kind of drip feed you enough to keep it interesting. Gale, I actually don't really have any complaints about. Like, he's a little weird as a character, but like there's some cool stuff that he eventually tells you. So it's not bad. I actually enjoyed Gale's for the most part. Shadowheart's, again, I think they stuck with the roleplay with her really well. So again, spoiler if for some reason you still haven't realized there's going to be them. Shadowheart is actually a worshipper of Shar, the goddess of secrets and the darkness, basically. Shadowheart being a worshipper of Shar, makes perfect sense that she's keeping secrets to herself, because Shadowheart won't tell you anything. She'll barely talk to you. She'll keep everything to herself just about, and you have to go through a huge hassle to get her to tell you or open up, like, literally at all. In the context of her character, again, makes perfect sense. Like, she's a worshipper of Shar, absolutely. She would definitely do that. It's all about secrets, right? The problem is that Shadowheart, because she's doing that, winds up being super annoying. Like, basic questions, they make her like super short and rude, and it's just like, hey, I'm just trying to solve this tadpole in her head problems. Maybe stop being so rude about it. An innocuous question. Some of it makes sense, but I think they went like just a little overboard with Shadowheart, and it makes her honestly more annoying than interesting to me. And then there is Will. So Will, the problem I have with Will is they try to hype him up as the Blades of the Frontier. Like, his actual backdrop story seems interesting enough, but the problem is that they're like, you meet him, He's this level 1 or 2 guy, and they're like, oh, Will, the Blade of the Frontiers. He's done all this amazing hero-y stuff. And he's gonna get murdered by goblins constantly because we hyped him up to be some big hero, but in reality, he's level 1 or 2 just like you, and he dies all the time. So it's just, I don't know. I didn't care for Will. If they hadn't tried to make him out to be this big hero guy, I think it would have been better. Like, maybe just make him like a local swordsman or something. But they went with like he's famous for all these exploits type stuff, and I just feel like it doesn't land because it doesn't make any sense. That said, his actual backstory is a little more interesting. I don't want to ruin it too much, but like he's definitely in league with a demon of some sort. I didn't get quite enough of it to say for sure what's happening, but it seems to maybe be like a warlockish situation or something to that effect. But he's got some interesting stuff going on outside of that, but that part didn't land. Basically, to just wrap that part up real quick, all these companions have something like just really weird about them that it just makes it like hard to connect with them because they're either being super short and rude, they're really dull or uninteresting. They don't make 100% sense, in my opinion, as far as like what they're saying or doing. Now, that said, if they would just brush up some of this, maybe make it a little more impactful, I guess, it could still be salvaged. Like, most of the characters themselves I enjoy. And actually, what I did want to mention is that if I were playing as them as an origin character, which you can't do in early access just yet, they would actually probably be really fun. But as they are, you're only interacting with them in a third person, so you only get so much information about them because you're not them. And the way it's fed to you, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is not great. And I hope they kind of brush that up and maybe move some stuff around to make them either just more interesting or at least a little easier to talk to, because most of them are not fun to be around at all, in my opinion. There you go, guys. A little rambly there at the end, but there are some things for Baldur's Gate 3 I hope they brush up before launch, things that I hope improve. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, if you happen to have done so. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.